Salutations, Legion of Doom. Welcome to Podcast of the Storm, where socially awkward outcasts, crazy weirdos, and all-around nerds convene to talk and debate all things pop culture. With me, as always, is my co-host, the nerdy occultist, aka the Authenticator, Dolphin L. Mortimer.
Hello and good evening, folks.
And I am your host last time on Wannabe, the Brainstormer of Pop Culture. How's everyone doing tonight?
Tired, as we both were just discussing off stream.
Yes. Well, we have a very interesting night. Mostly it's going to be us groaning and moaning like we usually do.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully we'll have some fun out of it.
Yeah, there are some positive stories to be had this time. It's actually fairly even if the last article turns out to be as decent as we hope it will be.
If anything, we'll get funny. We'll get good enough
material out of it. So, yep, the stupidity pays the metaphorical bills, so to speak. So, bring it on.
You know, if that was actually the case, I'm pretty sure I'd be rich by now.
Well, yeah, if we could actually make substantive money off of yelling at stupid people, or rather yelling at stupid ideas that people happen to hold.
Yeah. I should have opened it before we went on.
Yeah. But, you know, it's only been 61 episodes. We'll get the hang of it eventually.
Yep.
Okay, what would a podcast of the storm be without waiting for stupid technical errors or stupid unprofessionalism?
Not our podcast.
This is true. It would not be. But hey, even big channels have stuff like that happens all the time. Like on Honey Badger Radio, Karen Strawn's dog barks at the microphone every time. So yeah, it happens. Happens to the best of them.
Okay, okay. You were really gonna plug that channel whenever you can, aren't you?
The folks over at Honey Badger Radio are awesome, and they need more. They need more love. And actually, now that I'm in the Honey Badger Radio Discord, I have talked to both Allison and her husband Jonathan on various different occasions, and they are good people. It's not an act put forward before the cameras. They are genuinely pretty awesome people, it seems.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so our first article is one we couldn't cover last week simply because of time, and also me and Dawn were really tired.
We were knackered, as the British would put it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so yeah, this is from the Daily Mail, .co.uk.
Mm-hmm.
This is written by Ryan Morrison, published April 24th, 2020. So, like I said, this is last week's article.
Mhm.
So, no laughing matter. Blockbuster movie Joker may have made filmgoers more prejudiced towards people with mental health problems. Study shows.
Okay, I get the feeling that I'm gonna have to channel Teal Deer for this segment of the live stream, and I'm
I
fine
feel
with
like I
that.
need to get a root beer.
Yeah, probably.
Um,
Also, if anyone is playing the Brainstormer pop culture drinking game at home, that was one of your cues to drink, ironically.
yeah, I'll do that after.
Brainstormer defaulting to his preferred beverages is a reason to drink your own.
Well, if I actually had beer or something, I would probably drink. Actually, you know
Yeah,
what?
that
I'm
that
not.
would that would that would be a problem though, because if either of us had actual alcohol to play the drinking games with, we both be dead.
Or just too shit faced to really do the podcast. So
Yeah,
drink
yeah, that
responsibly.
that that yeah, that too.
Yeah, PSA, folks. Drink responsibly.
Yeah,
God damn, why are there
yeah,
so many fucking ads?
and be very selective about the booze you do drink. If you're going to get if you're going to get completely plastered on something, at least make sure it's something good and not the $2 swill you can get down at like the gas station or some shit.
Yeah, I have standards. Anyway, as experts ask people questions about mental health before and after film. Authors say people were 14%. Don't know why that's like per and cent or whatever. More prejudice after watching the movie. The movie was released in 2019 and was the first R-rated film to make $1 billion. Really? I don't.
Yes, yes.
Huh?
Not only did it make over a billion, but it made more money than The Dark Knight. It ended up making like 1 billion 74 million at the box office. And funnily enough, its actual budget was only 62.5 billion. So it actually made a billion and more than its budget at the box office.
Okay, so Oscar-winning comic book movie The Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix, may have led to filmgoers developing prejudices towards people with mental health problems.
Oh, okay,
Okay, first off,
yeah, go ahead.
was as a man who saw the um, movie as a filmgoer, I'm sure Dalton as well
Mm-hmm.
can attest to this. I had no, there was no increased percentage of prejudice towards mental health. If anything, it was more of gained me more. It allowed me an inlook. I gained a lot more sympathy
If
for
anything,
people
it
with mental health.
increased empathy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I was trying to get across.
Mm-hmm.
Please.
Okay. Thing the first, how exactly did your study define prejudice? What are the parameters? Again, channeling a little bit of teal deer here. If if you are going to tell me that a stimulus increased an abstract parameter like prejudice, you need to provide me with the definitions of that parameter. You need to define exactly what you mean in as clinical and precise terms as possible what you mean by prejudice and how exactly you're measuring it. What was the study's methodology? Was it just an opinion poll? Were there any prejudice related questions on a survey or something post viewing? Was there a control group of people that didn't see the movie? Or did you say, or did you, for example, um, poll people once before the movie and once after the movie? And again, assuming you're definition of prejudice was solid. Was there an increase there? Second, though, even if I grant that your methodology was fine and everything was above board and you accurately and substantively defined the term prejudice in a precise manner, even if I grant you all that, 14% is not a large margin, especially when you consider the following variable. What was the size of the control group? Was it just a movie theater's worth of people that you surveyed? Did you go around to various showings of Joker and interview a lot of people who had seen the movie and maybe done it again beforehand to check the control? Or are you just taking a very, very small sample size and abstractly claiming over them because according to however arbitrarily you've defined the term prejudice, less than 20% of the people experience a marked increase in prejudice? And the reason I bring up the size of the control group is 14% of 5 people is not a lot of people, you see. 14% of 100 people isn't even necessarily a whole lot when you consider the size of the proportion. If you were to say 14% of the entire planet, that would probably be something substantive. But as it stands, I find your methodology suspect, your terms and variables suspect, your method of measuring suspects, and like even the amounts in question are fucking suspect. What the actual fuck? If I were to give you a grade for this, I would give you a D. I award you no points. May God have mercy on your soul. Moving on.
So just going drama queen there, huh?
Well, I'm sorry, but people who use statistics to basically grant their suppositions more authority without ever actually examining the statistics or demonstrating that the statistics are in any way reliable piss me off. Because again, I'm a big fan of a lot of people here on the YouTube that basically make a habit of debunking those kind of studies, and I'm a logic spur anyway, so yeah, I've gone to the informal Teal Deer and Aiden Paladin and Allison Teeman school of fuck your statistics if they don't make any goddamn sense. And that's not even getting into the actual philosophical error, which I'll get into the next time we hit a fail.
Okay. A study by researchers at the University of Otago in New Zealand found that animosity towards people with troubled minds increased when people watched the movie. It was a global hit in the world's first R-rated billion-dollar blockbuster, but the 2019 movie caused controversy for its portrayal of violence and insanity. Honestly,
and there it is. Go ahead. Sorry.
Honestly, the problem with their problem with the movie was that it wasn't trying to take any side. It was just addressing a problem, showing different viewpoints and sides of it. And if anything, it was just a movie of a man falling into the darkness.
Yeah. Point the second, which I will put this up. Most of the time, the actual justifications that the alarmists gave during the whole Joker controversy was that they thought it would make people too sympathetic to people with mental health issues. Now, because that very evidently did not fucking happen, and or if it did happen, it would be a fucking good thing. Because of that, they've completely switched the magnetic poles of the argument. Now that they can't say, "Oh, you're going to justify incels. You're going to treat incels like they're reasonable. You're going to turn people into terrorists because if you show people that insane people have reasons for doing the fucked up shit they do, then people will be more inclined to do those fucked up things. You have to shame and degrade and distrust everyone, except when we do it. Then you should be nice to everyone, and if you have any kind of hatred whatsoever, it's bad." But now that it's been very obvious that that did not happen, and or if it did, it was a good thing, they're switching it up and going, "Oh my God, this is basically comparing every mentally ill person to a deranged sociopath." To which I would respond, would you go ahead and argue with the fucking journalists that were going, "You're going to make people too sympathetic to violent sociopaths in the first place, please"? Pick a lane, you ignoramuses. Is the movie bad because it makes mentally ill and violent people more sympathetic? Or is the movie bad because it will make people think of mentally ill people as all violent like the Joker? You do realize that these two modes of thought are mutually exclusive from each other. They directly contravene each other, logically speaking. You cannot. It's like having hot ice. Based on the qualities we ascribe to ice, it is necessarily not hot. And based on the qualities we ascribe to heat, it would definitely not produce ice. This is an absolute logical impossibility, and you need to pick one. But funnily enough, I find this really annoying because it's like, we'll reach for any reason to harangue and harass this movie because it fucked with our moral framework. And so it's all post hoc rationalization. Either it's good because it treats mentally ill people as too sympathetic, or it's bad because it treats mentally ill people as not sympathetic enough. But goddamn, pick a lane, please. Okay, moving on.
Right. Okay. Where was I? The Warner Brothers movie fueled a rise in bigotry against people with mental illness, according to new research, with a rise of 14% in animosity towards people with troubled minds after someone watched the movie. Again, I would argue the complete opposite.
Yeah. And even if we take your premise as you presented it, again, I must ask, how are you defining animosity? How are you measuring this animosity? What methodology did you use? How were the questions phrased if this was in a survey type format? Because studies have actually shown that you can get different results with the same method if you change the way certain survey questions are framed. For example, in the case of rape statistics, if you ask people directly, "Were you raped?" the number goes down to a ludicrous degree. But if you ask people, "Were you ever pressured into doing something sexually that you didn't want to do?" that number gets skyrocketed. And the problem is, most of the time when that second option happens, the pressured to do something sexually I didn't want to do gets reported as rape, even though when it's phrased directly, "Were you raped?" people say no directly. The same thing might be happening here. Depending on how the questions are framed, it might be inclined toward getting more people to say yes than no. And it's 14% either way, which is an insubstantial number depending on the size of your control group. And again, I have serious doubts that you went out and polled more than 10,000 people, which would be a sizable control group or a sizable sample group for this. I suspect you showed a bunch of people the movie and you had them complete a survey based on criteria of animosity that you came up with but didn't actually fucking define, and then used that number. But even if we're assuming everything about your methodology was right, 14% does not a substantial amount make under most circumstances unless you're using astronomically large sample sizes, in which case it could, in theory, be substantial. Because again, if you poll 14% of the entire planet's population, that's a substantial amount. But if you poll the, contents of your average office building, that's not a very substantial amount. See? Because 14% of 5 people is less than 1 person. And so on. That's an example. Moving on.
Alright, so the authors say the film and people's reaction to it could affect the level of help and support patients get both professionally and socially. As estimated, 9 in 10 people with mental health issues in the UK have suffered stigma and discrimination, although not specifically as a result of the Joker film.
Okay, so you just undermined your own thing there then, but either way, what were the people in question doing? Because very often, unfortunately, mentally ill people do bad things. Not saying that therefore makes them bad people, because they may not be in control of themselves. They may be severely mentally ill. But the question becomes, in such a statement like that, what exactly is the illness in question? Because some people are congenital sociopaths, and unfortunately, congenital sociopaths do bad things. And some people are psychopaths, and they can occasionally do bad things. Although a vast minority of people who, or a vast majority of people who are diagnostically psychopathic are not in any way violent, and can actually learn to approximate empathy. But that's neither here nor there. Point being, if someone is a violent schizophrenic and they commit a crime, stigma against that individual is not stigma against mentally ill people as a whole. It's probably stigma against whatever act they were doing. And unfortunately, sometimes when mentally ill people do things, it's not to the level of criminality, but it is fundamentally creepy. And unfortunately, when people do creepy things, regardless of their mental state, people are going to get creeped out, which might qualify as animosity, depending on your definition of the word animosity and how you're measuring it. It's one of the reasons why we separate, legally speaking, what's known as the actus reus, or the guilty act, versus the mens rea, which is the guilty mind. People's motivations do matter, and if you're not in full control of your actions, that is, in some cases, and in fact in most cases, a mitigating factor. But depending upon how severe the guilty act was, it becomes less and less justifiable. For example, if you up and murder 10 people in a crowded theater, for example, very little of your mens rea is going to get you out of the prison sentence, or more likely hospitalization you got coming, because people do actually plead not guilty by reason of insanity. That is an allowance we make in our culture, and it is good that we do that, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, were people stigmatizing creepy people doing creepy and or disruptive and or criminal things? Or were they going, I hate, insert term for crazy people here? Because those are two very different things, depending on how you're measuring this shit. Now, isn't it? Moving on.
Alright. Corresponding author Dr. Damien Scarf said Joker was clearly associated with higher levels of prejudice toward those with mental illness.
14% is not high unless you are using astronomical sample sizes for your research, sir. and I haven't looked at the study, but unless you're going to tell me this survey was, I don't know, 100,000 people or more, I'm not going to substantiate your claim that that 14% qualifies as a high level. And also, I find it suspect of how you're actually defining animosity and so forth. How are you defining your terms, sir? Because in a clinical setting where you're trying to scientifically determine something like that, it matters how you define things. And if you fuck around with the definition of words well enough and fuck around with the definition of abstract concept well enough, you can say just about anything with statistics. That's why the phrase goes, there are lies, damn lies in statistics, because some people use statistics not as a rational tool, but as an authoritative one. They take whatever a statistic says on board just on faith, essentially, or on the authority of the fact that it's a statistic, and don't actually look at the rational procedure that gives, or would ideally give, the statistic any kind of clout or solidity to it. Okay, but moving on.
Beyond prejudice, associating mental illness with violence may erode support for policies that we know to be beneficial for those with mental illness, such as integration into communities, Scarf said. Additionally, Joker may exacerbate self-stigma for those with a mental illness, leading to delays in help seeking.
No. No, 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 no. Fuck. No. If you actually, goddamn, watch the fucking movie, sir, you would know that many of the plights that befall Arthur Fleck, i.e. the Joker, are the results of not having the appropriate access to the exact policies to which you are referring, i.e., not being integrated into communities because, of course, everyone distanced themselves from him and beat the shit out of him at any given opportunity, at least as far as we are presented within the story. And, of course, medication issues were brought up, and strikes were brought up, and people's general misanthropy was brought up. So you, by your own logic, you should be praising the shit out of this movie, because while it had many, many angles for which to take on Joker, one of the things it was most consistent on from just about every angle was society and people at large do not do enough to help people in these dire straits, and more should probably be done to avoid situations like Arthur Fleck's. And we probably should understand that just because something is rational or might be justified in someone's own head, that doesn't mean they're morally justified, but it does mean that we should at least see these people as humans and not freaks of nature or moral defects. That was one of the most consistent axioms of the movie from just about every angle you could possibly view it from. And you're sitting here honestly telling me that it actually increased prejudice against those people rather than any of the themes that were presented within the movie. Well, if that's the case, or you just went and proved that the themes of the movie don't have an impact on the impact of the movie. And if you're not going to support that supposition, then I highly recommend you reevaluate your data, sir. Clearly something is fucked up within the collection method. And again, I'm just going to go back to this. Unless you're using a ridiculous sample size in your study, 14% is not a large enough number to be statistically significant in this matter. Moving on.
The movie charts the descent into madness of Batman's archenemy from his beginnings as a failed comedian and earned Joaquin Phoenix an Oscar. We're not supposed to see the movie increase prejudice toward people with mental illness. Scarf said it plays on common stereotypes about people with mental illness being unpredictable and violent.
I'm sorry, what movie were you watching? I, like, am I going to say, did that actually directly counter what happened in the movie to anyone else? Because there are many ways you can look at Joker. It's a very well-rounded movie, and it's one of the strengths of the movie that it doesn't boil everything down to a neat little this is the message you must take from this movie, and all other messages are inadmissible point. But I'm convinced this man has not watched this movie. I this is why I don't automatically bow down to the wisdom of the experience of people with, PhDs and shit, because if they're not actually going to use the information contained within that certification, it means nothing, essentially. And if they're so dumb that not even heavy doses of academia can make them coherent, then I shouldn't be listening to them anyway.
Dr. Scarf's team measured whether watching the 2019 film changed cinemagoers' level of prejudice toward mental illness sufferers using a common survey. They found that in a study of 84 volunteers, the level of prejudice
Okay,
rose,
right. Go ahead. Sorry, I'll make
rose,
my point after.
rose dramatically on a scale used by psychiatrists called PPMI, prejudice toward people with mental illness.
Okay.
Oh, wait, hold on. Before seeing it, the average score was 2.99. Afterwards, it was 3.2. That is a 14% increase in the level of animosity.
Okay, let me break this down. Let me go full teal deer on this shit for a second. Number one, I was right in being questioning of your methodology. Number one, it was volunteers, which you very rarely ever want to very rarely ever want to pursue active volunteers for something like this. Number two, 84 people is not a substantial sample size to make these kind of claims, especially if it's only an increase of 14%. Number three, if the percentage in question is between 2 and 4% of the respondents, that essentially means that not that what you're measuring with the 14% isn't even the final number. It's not the number of people in the sample that had animosity towards mentally ill people. What you're essentially telling me is 2% of those 84 people you asked had any preconceptions of mentally ill people originally. And after seeing the movie, some people were a little bit more squigged out by mentally ill people or the thought of mentally ill people, and it increased from roughly 2% to roughly 3%. But you remember how I was just bitching at you for how 14% is not a a statistically significant number to count for anything? Well, if that's true for 14% in this case, sir, can you imagine my chagrin at finding out the actual number is just a little over 3%? And that you were measuring just the increase, and just the increase of people who had any sorts of preconceptions about mentally ill people. wasn't even a substantial amount to begin with. It could, in fact, be accounted for by statistical error, because generally there's about a 5 to 10% of statistical error in these kind of surveys, especially in stuff that's very opinion related and terms aren't nailed down to the precision that they should be. What in the infinite chasm of stalactites made of crystallized fuck? This is hitting all my Spurg buttons, and we're gonna move on.
Okay, so let's see. On the other hand, there was no such effect found in people who watched a different R-rated movie, Terminator Dark Fate, which I believe is a terrible movie. I haven't seen it, but I've seen plenty of reviews.
It is not good. It's not. It's not. Okay. It is probably the best movie since Terminator 2. However, if you're a Terminator fan, you know just about every movie except for Terminator 1 and Terminator 2 in the Terminator franchise is a bit shit. And varying degrees of a bit shit. So there's that.
Okay. Alright, so let's see what they have here. In fact, average PPMI fell slightly from 291 to 288. Both films had been rated R for their violence. Same as Joker.
291 to 288 is a 0.02%, which is not even a full percent. That is a fraction of a percent that it changed. And need I remind you that the margin for error for these kind of statistics, especially when the thing you're measuring in question is very abstract and in need of clarification, is between 5 and 10% usually. So you're telling me that essentially there was effectively no change that is statistically significant in any way in either case. That is what you were telling me. This, ladies and gentlemen, is an example of the most ideologically biased and cherry-picked statistic I have ever seen. Now, granted, I am no Aiden Paladin or Teal there, or even an Allison Seaman or a Karen Strawn. However, I do like myself some numbers and some logic, and my fucking god, this is bad statistics. And I'm a layman when it comes to this shit. So if I'm telling you that this is bad statistics, I'm pretty sure Tealbeard's head would fucking explode, and Aiden Paladin would sue you for statistical fail, basically. Sorry, I keep citing my favorite YouTubers, but it's because I consider their work on the subject to be much more substantive than my own, and I borrow a lot of analyzing tricks from them. But yeah, anyone who wants to know more about like how to measure statistics and shit, go watch Aiden Paladin and Theodore, and also anything with Karen Strawn or Allison Seaman in it where they discuss statistics pretty much is also pretty bio. But I've shilled enough for Honey Badgers tonight, so I'm not gonna do it again.
Right, okay, so let me do some real quick before I read. Okay, this requires under 17s in the US to be accompanied by an adult. The ages of the 164 participants across both movies ranged from 18 to over 60.
Okay, but 100 and however many you've cited there is not a substantial sample size to make these kind of broad sweeping claims, especially not if one side of the divide contained 84 people and the other side contained less than that, which it appears to be based on that number. Although, no, I guess 84 times 2 would be roughly 168. So either way, that both of those are insubstantial sample sizes to make any kind of claim. It's essentially trying to make an argument based on you found 10 people who it afflicted, but it's not even that, because you didn't even go all the way to 100 on both cases, which would at least give us a solid indication of a percent of a whole, because we like measuring things in units of 100. But you went less than 100. You went to 84, which for one thing is a very arbitrary number that makes these maths hard to calculate. And for another thing, it's a fairly insubstantial sample size considering most large movie theaters can accommodate more than 84 fucking people. So you didn't even find a movie theater's worth of people to talk about this with. Not to mention, you got volunteers to do it, which implies people who are at least interested in participating in psychological studies, which might actually bias their results. So yeah, statistical fail even from a layman dipshit like me. I return to the I think it's Billy Madison or Happy Gilmore quote. I award you no points. May God have mercy on your soul. Moving on.
The PPMI test is based on 28 questions, such as how you feel talking to someone with mental illness, inviting them to your home, or becoming romantically involved.
Okay, So what are the possible results, or what are the possible answers to those questions? And of the possible answers to those questions, what goes in the positive integer pile and what goes in the negative integer pile? Because usually on a scale of like 1 to 10 or 1 to 100 or however large the scale is, above a certain number is considered confirming to whatever variable you're testing for, and below a certain number is considered counter to whatever you're testing for. So of those questions, what were the possible answers in the survey, and how many of those possible answers were considered positive, negative, or neutral? Because you could have taken everyone who said, I somewhat feel a little awkward around people with mental illness, and included them in I am prejudiced against these people. Which, I'm sorry, but there is a vast cauldron of difference between I feel occasionally a little bit off-put by people, and I actively experience prejudice or consistent negative thoughts about this variety of human. Those are two very different states of being and states of mind, and you may have just lumped them together depending on how this fucking survey is constructed. So fail again until you actually demonstrate to me you've had a decent methodology from this. But even if you did, your sample size is fairly non-substantial and your terminology is ill-defined anyway. So fuck right off with it. Moving on.
Mm-hmm. Alright, in the film, Phoenix's character Arthur visits Arkham State Hospital to receive medication for a mental illness, but this is stopped due to budget cuts, and he turns into a conveyed serial killer. Alright, again, the movie states that he's already going through it with it, even when taking the medications. He's starting to lose himself.
And if you want to know why, it might have something to do with the beatings he takes on the regular, both as a child and as an adult, and the severe alienation effects he's experienced. People have actually done studies on psychological alienation and like affection deprivation. it's not good for a human being to go without some sign of affection in long scale periods of time. There are actual physical responses that a body has to long-term deprivation, not to mention the psychological ones, like the predisposition towards depression, for, obvious reasons. If no one on the goddamn planet wants to fucking touch you, I would feel pretty depressed too. But studies have also shown that it has negative effects on how your DNA actually can replicate itself. So you can actually worry yourself into something like cancer or an autoimmune disorder if you have any predisposition towards it, if you go long stretches of time without any kind of human contact. So I can imagine for someone like Arthur, who was beaten as a child, that these effects would probably be even worse and much easier to trigger in the first place. Not to mention, getting actively beaten doesn't tend to do good things for you psychologically or physically either. Moving on.
Mhm. Alright. In November, it became the first R-rated movie to pass 1 billion, or 772 million pounds mark in global ticket sales. Uh, More than 100 million people have seen it worldwide. Because Joker continues tradition of movies depicting individuals with mental illness as violent, it has reignited discussion about the role of media in perpetuating prejudice toward
Oh,
those with a mental illness. Since far.
for fuck's sake, 80% of the movie's runtime was showing Arthur in as sympathetic a light as could be managed, showing how a reasonable, rational, but not necessarily lucid human being can be driven to do terrible things. In the words of the Killing Joke, all it takes is one bad day. That's how far the world is from where I am. That, if anything, was the point of the movie. Yes, it very loosely adapted The Killing Joke. Yes, it made many adjustments to the backstory from The Killing Joke. But if it could be said that that movie has a theme, it could very easily be argued that, at least thematically speaking, The Killing Joke and the the Joker, at least diegetically, have the same themes. Yes, Alan Moore was a bit of a wanker, and he was actually making fun of that attitude in The Killing Joke. That's one of the reasons why The Killing Joke isn't as good as it would otherwise be. But taking it on its own merits and telling Alan Moore and his authorial intent to go fuck itself, that is basically the point of the movie. It's making it very obvious that Arthur was a fairly decent person, at least how he's presented, and was driven to madness by circumstance, natural predisposition, and essentially day after day of those kind of days you might refer to as a one bad day. So, no, it doesn't depict people with mental illness as inherently violent. If anything, it actively challenges that preconception by spending 80% of its runtime going, but have you ever actually considered it from his perspective, though? And wouldn't it be nice if we could all just get along and be somewhat decent to each other and not be psychotic fucking misanthropes who will turn out nothing but psychotic fucking misanthropes? Moving on.
We hypothesize that compared with viewing Terminator Dark Fate, viewing Joker will be associated with higher levels of prejudice toward individuals with mental illness.
Even if that is a rational conclusion to draw from your data, which, as I've said, probably is not the case, how much higher is this prejudice, considering it is 14% of 3% that you using very dubious methods, have convinced yourself that Joker leads to. So essentially, you went from 2 people in 84, or 2% of 84 people, roughly, saying, I have vague feelings towards people with mental illness that we don't even know how you're actually measuring because you don't give us any of the actual answers to the survey or explain where each answer falls on the scale the survey is being judged by. It went from that to 3%, which, given the margin of error for these things is between 5 and 10% typically, and even the best surveys usually have an error margin of 1%, it's statistically insignificant to a ludicrous degree. And even if we're just going by the increased number, 14% is also fairly insignificant to a ludicrous degree when you take into account you're only examining for 84 people. And mind you, as you just said, 100 million people plus have seen this movie. So why, if you wanted to make this point, did you not examine as much of that 100 million people as you could get your hands on, with as precise a clinical instrument as you could and as precise a methodology as you could? Why did you just pick out 14 random volunteers, mind, who willingly want to take part of psychological surveys, therefore slightly biasing them at least? And why did you take the results of that 84 people, 2% of that 84 people, and start to draw massive conclusions based on all of society from that? Why have you done that? It's probably because you hated Joker, but every narrative you have keeps getting undone and undone and undone. So at least unintentionally, a part of you wanted Joker to be associated with bad things. So when you were doing statistics, your perspective biased you, and now this is why we have shit statistics that don't prove the thing you're suggesting they prove, and we're expected to take it fucking seriously. You may fuck off, sir. You do not deserve the doctor in front of your name, and I refuse to use it any further.
This team took the participants to a movie theater in Dunedin, New Zealand, where they were randomly assigned to watch either film. They completed the PPMI scale before and after watching the movie. Dr. Scarf pointed out the study published in JAMA Network Open did not assess whether viewing Joker was associated with actual behavior, just thoughts.
Okay, so number one, if you measured everything correctly, which I find extremely dubious to claim, it just relates to people's perspectives and not anything you can even remotely call actionable, otherwise you would have made a more actionable claim. And even if that is the case, you still didn't differentiate for us between I actively despise these people in my own thoughts, or I have vague mistrust towards these people in my own thoughts. But there is a vast difference between I occasionally feel uncomfortable around these people and I actively hate them. But this is what a lot of these types of surveys do. They take I occasionally feel bad about dealing with these people, and they conflate that, or they say that that implies active hatred. They say that if you have any uncomfortableness or any uncertainty about a kind of people at all, that qualifies as the beginnings of hate, and therefore we can qualify it as exactly hate. Which is bullshit. Even people we love very much occasionally make us uncomfortable. It's just a part of being a human being, because human beings, unfortunately, are flawed and therefore will occasionally misread each other. And in misreading each other, they may do or say or even think things about the other person that makes that other person uncomfortable, and the other person, unless it's major, usually just has to kind of deal with it, unfortunately. I occasionally get made uncomfortable by even people I consider very close friends. Brainstormer, I'm sure, gets vaguely uncomfortable every time I make a pun. Hence the disappointed glare of, oh my god, I can't believe this guy is my friend, that he does. But does that mean that Brainstormer hates me as a person? No, it doesn't mean, and it most certainly doesn't mean that every time he gets exasperated by my puns, that he even necessarily hates people who make puns a lot. Let alone, if if you were to say, it proves that he has a bias against disabled people, because that's vacantly and clearly false, sir. Just as an example. Apologies for the anecdote. Moving on.
But he added, in The Dark Knight, Joker asks, "Why so serious?" One might level that question at us, arguing that Joker is nothing to be concerned with. However, with this view ignores is the profound consequences prejudice has on those with a mental illness.
Okay. Time to weaponize the anecdote then. I have severe anxiety. This anxiety was so severe that I ended up having to drop out of college through no major fault of mine, mentally speaking. But I do not consider myself to be an exemplar of some kind of mentally ill community. However, allowing for this for a second, I do have severe anxiety. And I fucking loved Joker. For many, 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 many reasons, but one of them that I don't talk about very often is how much I, especially when I'm feeling upset with the world, relate to Arthur Fleck. Does that mean that I am going to go and do the things that Arthur does in the movie and kill people? No. No, and I never would if I was even remotely close to in my right mind. However, that being said, I find Arthur to be an incredibly sympathetic character who I can relate to at the worst of times in my life. And you are looking at that and you are saying that I, as someone with severe anxiety, could potentially be harmed by this movie that I love very, very dearly. You can take those faulty statistics, make them into a piece of barbed wire, and fuck yourself with them until you are anally bleeding, sir. Moving on.
James Holmes, dressed head to toe in tactical gear, gunned down 12 people during a screening of the sequel Dark Knight Rises in Colorado. That included Jessica I okay. Second, it's Jawai, I think. 24. His mother, Sandy Phillips, told BBC News she was horrified by the Joker trailers.
Okay. Number one, James Holmes did not consider himself in any way aligned with the Joker. He picked the movie at random, and he in no way in his manifestos or anything relating to his backstory resembled Heath Ledger's Joker. Minding all of this, it's a completely different Joker, and it was more than 10 years ago. Maybe if someone had actually been kind to Mr. Holmes way back when, that shooting would have never happened. I'm not saying that people who are irredeemably broken or just enjoy doing bad things because they like doing them. I'm not saying those people don't exist, but as a general rule, if you want to deter terrible sociopathic behavior, it's better if people don't become nihilistic or cynical at any substantial point in their life, because that kind of outlook may just be the thing that tips a unstable but at least well-meaning person from mostly harmless to a fucking headline. And it would also be helpful if not every story like this was used to scaremonger for people, because by making these people public spectacles, you may inspire people that are that way inclined to do them so that they in turn become public spectacles. Knock it the fuck off, please. Moving on, unless you had anything to.
No, I'm good. I really can't really. I have very little knowledge on this kind of subject matter. So, all right. Warner Brothers said the film was not an endorsement of real-world violence. Phoenix walked out of an interview when asked about the issue. Dr. Scarf still thinks movies like Joker can be made, but Hollywood needs to reduce the negative impact, including making information available on screen before and after the movie to make it clear the mental health depiction is fictional. It's a fucking movie. People kind of assume it's fucking fiction.
And even irrespective of that, are you honestly telling me that we should never make movies that portray these people in sympathetic lights then? Because if you're telling me that fiction can't be used to ever make a philosophical point or make an analogy or depict something for the sake of drawing attention to it, if you're telling me that, then basically every movie that has ever won the Oscars in the last 20 years needs to be rubbed off from the start, because unfortunately the old guard film press in Hollywood loves a message movie. And if you want movies to not be able to convey messages, then I highly suggest you take it up with them. But if you are not willing to go that far, then need I remind you that there have been no substantial negative consequences of Joker as a movie. There have, however, been several positive ones, including actually inspiring protests and riots of every different kind, making people with mental illness seem more sympathetic instead of villainizing them, and creating widespread discussion of these issues. So once again, if you are laying the feet, or if you are laying negative consequences at the feet of this movie, you need to actually demonstrate them with something more substantive than a 14% increase of a statistic that was in the single digits to begin with on a sample size that is less than 100 people strong and highly dubious in its collection methodology. Once again, fuck you and your statistics fail.
Sorry, I mean a pork chop.
Okay.
All right. Sorry.
You mean to say that you are pigging out?
Damn it, Dalton.
I'm sorry.
No, you're not.
Okay, I know.
All right, so another possibility is a brief video of someone with a mental illness conveying impact mental illness prejudice has had on their life. The former is more of an education/fact-based approach, while the aim of the latter would be to increase empathy.
So you mean if a real world person with a psychological profile similar to Arthur Fleck said that they enjoyed Arthur Fleck as a character and they didn't consider the depiction negative, that would be okay for you? Or would you be accusing that person of having internalized self prejudice? Because that's the thing. Whenever someone disagrees with your framework or your worldview in these kinds of situations, and I'm not saying you personally, um, doctor, but people much like you seem to have this penchant for taking anyone who you claim to speak for who disagrees with your framework or disagrees with your conclusions, who doesn't agree with you, basically, and saying that they only disagree with you because they secretly hate themselves and have Stockholm syndrome, more or less. But when people agree with you, they become the exemplars that you hold up to everyone and say, this is why I should be believed when I make arguments about these people. Because I can tell you that as a person with severe anxiety and several other disabilities that are not mental in nature, I find Arthur Fleck and his journey to be extremely sympathetic, violence or no violence. And many other people with mental illnesses latched onto that movie and bolstered it because they felt it was so emotionally satisfying and sympathetic towards them. So are you going to tell all of those people that they are wrong and they secretly have Stockholm syndrome and they hate themselves? Or are you going to admit that you are making shit up and you are fucking full of shit, sir? Because basically, the video you are talking about, the video that makes people empathize more with people with mental illness, would be something like Joker. And if you had someone ahead of Joker come on and basically play the victim, that would honestly make people more prejudiced against them than the actual movie would. Because Arthur doesn't essentially consider himself the victim of his own circumstances until it becomes very obvious he is, we empathize with him. When someone just out of the blue says something like that, we consider that a little bit like the boy who cried wolf. Therefore, a lot of people are turned off by it, especially because victimhood, because it is so valuable and powerful, can be used to manipulate people. Therefore, a large amount of people have become very suspicious of people who make victimhood claims. So rather than just make an outright victimhood claim, it's better to actually demonstrate the victimhood in question without calling it victimhood, because that will garner actual sympathy instead of making it seem like you're preaching to someone. Moving on.
Um, hmm. Okay. Research by statistics body NHS Digital has found that any one time 1 in 16 to 64-year-olds in England has a mental health problem.
Wait, what was that number?
1 in 6.
Okay, and
That's all. I think. Hold on. Yeah, that's the entire article there.
okay, now do me a favor, Daily Mail, if you honestly think that this was a viable argument, why don't you conduct a survey of that roughly 1 in 6 people with documented mental illness? Why don't you show them the Joker and ask them whether they found it insulting or whether they found it to be sympathetic and in fact even encouraging? because I actually was slightly more optimistic about things after watching Joker, because at least a movie like Joker allows us to discuss it rather than proclaim morally on high based on it like some flaky aristocratic Puritans in the modern era. Okay, moving on to something at least a little bit happy.
What?
Isn't the trailer next?
Well, before we get to that, Chrononaut is here, and he says, so far it sounds like straight female feminists trying to explain the plight of a bisexual man in a relationship with a pre-op trans woman and a married lesbian, i.e. the writer doesn't know crap.
Yeah.
I have the mental illness. Lol, writer has no clue.
Yeah. Chrono is bipolar, I believe, if I'm not misremembering. So yeah, yet another person with what could be qualified as a mental illness saying Joker's awesome. So yeah.
Alright, so so our next topic is one Dolan sent to me last week, but I wasn't really sure we should cover it. And I did say I didn't even think that was. I thought you were just sending it to people, like, so check out. Like, so we're covering it now. So it's 2 weeks. Came out 2 weeks. Well, a week ago.
Mm-hmm.
But it's Let me pull it up. Yeah. So we're watching and reviewing the trailer for the HBO Max
Looney Tunes reboots, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I mostly wanted to cover this so I have an excuse to dance on the ashes of the Looney Tunes show from, I believe, 2009, because the stupid fuckers decided to take one of the most comedically versatile cast of characters in probably Western animation history and put them in a bitter early 2000s sitcom setup in a suburban neighborhood rather than, I don't know, anything else. The only thing that was genuinely good about the Looney Tunes show were the segments that involved Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner, because they effectively didn't change anything about the setup between Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. All they did was change the animation style from 2D to 3D, which was fine.
Mm.
But this show appears to be doing Looney Tunes right, or at least trying to. It's a little off, and I'm gonna need to get used to the modern references. But so far, I've watched that trailer a couple of times and I like it. But we'll react to it and see if I can come up with anything else to say about it.
I think some that's for Looney Tunes. Acme.
Yes.
Acme.
I think Acme may have been the manufacturers of my phone, given how often it fucks up. By the way, Acme, as it's presented in the Looney Tunes, was actually based on a real company that did mail order at one point around the time that those cartoons were made. It was actually kind of an unintentional product placement.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Acme bananas. Acme bananas.
Or the banana peels that characters then slip on, rather.
Banana split, then.
Yes. Also phrasing.
What's up, Jack? I'm challenging you to an arm wrestling match, rabbit.
Coochie coochie coo.
Oh, I'm just now realizing I had them.
Yeah, I couldn't really hear anything.
Yeah, that's my bad. Sometimes you just get videos that are like super loud, so you like turn down the volume.
Yeah, okay, so
My bad.
trying again.
Banana split.
Banana split.
What's up, Jack?
I'm challenging you to an arm wrestling match, rabbit.
Coochie coochie coo. I thought I saw a pudding cat.
Okay, small note about Bugs' gloves here because
They're
they're
yellow.
yellow, and I know for a lot of people that's probably going to be a turn off, and it does kind of rub me the wrong way a little bit because why on any earth would you redesign Bugs Bunny ever? But as it happens, I think this might actually be a reference to a little bit of the history of Looney Tunes because back in the early Looney Tunes episodes, I don't even think they were technically Looney Tunes branded at the time when they were still working on the designs for these characters. Proto Bugs basically did have yellow gloves sometimes, so it's kind of a nice little Easter egg to throw in there. If they were gonna do that, I would prefer they take a little bit more from his earlier design, but it's still a nice little Easter egg. It's gonna take some getting used to though, because Bugs Bunny has looked pretty much the same since like the Chuck Jones era at least. So it's gonna take some getting used to, but it is a nice touch. And note to the producers of Looney Tunes show, that is how you do Looney Tunes in a modern context. Thank you very fucking much. This little Easter egg at least demonstrates to me that even though it's not something I would have done, the people who are making this actually know and to some degree care about the history of the characters and don't want to change them to fit basically something that Seinfeld could manage. Which, side note, even putting actual Looney Tunes characters in a sitcom structure probably could have been done better because it basically would have been animated Seinfeld, but all we got instead was basically animated Friends, and I don't like Friends.
No one likes Friends.
Huh?
No one likes Friends.
Oh, there are some people who will viciously defend Friends. I don't know why.
Right.
But yeah.
The thing, I do have to say, I do like in conjunction with your statement on like animation and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I like the art style because it does have a similar thing to, not like early Looney Tunes, but more of like when it start like Chuck Jones.
Yeah, the Chuck Jones era.
But it is also
rest in peace, Chuck Jones and Mel Blanc, by the way, because my God, where would we be without you?
Mm-hmm. And I like how it does harken back to those original cartoons, like and how it looks and stuff, and like how the sets and backgrounds are designed.
Yeah, it doesn't try to fix what wasn't broken. It doesn't assume that Looney Tunes needs to be updated. It just sort of tries to do something fresh with the Looney Tunes. And while some of the modern references do irk me a bit, and the timing is a little bit off, I suspect in the actual show it will bother me less.
Mm-hmm.
Because it might just be the way that the trailers are edited. I did like also the little nod to the famous Bugs versus the Opera Singer episode, which I don't remember the name of. but basically everyone has seen it if you've seen a Looney Tunes
Yeah.
episode at this point.
And I'll be honest, it looks very much. It looks a lot crisper or like more smooth, I guess. I mean, I like the original one because you could tell like the small imperfections, which gave it more character.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't mind this either because there's still personality in each design and character and stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
you still get that.
Yeah, and it doesn't change the characters, which again I think is something very, very important. Because why on earth would you change the Looney Tunes? They've been until the Looney Tunes show came along and fucked with them. They had basically been the same since like the early 1930s, all the way up through 2003's Looney Tunes Back in Action. Even if the movies they were in or the shows they were in weren't particularly great, they were still consistent with each other. Whereas Looney Tunes show was like, we can do better. Make it for hipster 2000s kids who wish they were 90s kids. Yeah, fuck you, Looney Tunes show. I like this show is gonna basically do everything you didn't and show you why it's better. Okay, moving on. Banana Split.
1 second.
Or maybe carrot juice. Because what?
Okay, so let's see. That is a weird image to stop on.
Yeah.
Okay. Banana split or carrot juice or whatever at this point because
Yeah. Carrot juice.
Carrot juice.
I just love technology.
Yeah. The modern references are gonna get on my
Stretchy
nerves.
stuff. The crazy thing is, I don't even wear clothes. Hello, amusement park.
No filthy animals on my ride!
Oh, right.
Yeah, it really does seem like just a more like modern designed classic Looney Tunes show.
Mm-hmm.
Not like the Looney Tunes show, but like the
Yeah, no, it's an actual successor or a continuation to the original Looney Tunes with some touch-ups, which is fine. The modern references like Tweety going, "I love technology," a bit on the nose, no, but
I don't know about that.
I just it seems weird seeing them do modern shit because the Looney Tunes was always quintessentially timeless. While you could still look at it from the lens of this was made in the 30s and therefore it's a nice sort of time capsule of the sort of vaudeville era or the transition between the vaudeville era and like more sort of big band show tunesy kind of stuff.
But yeah, it's good that they're bringing in. Well, yeah, they're using the entire cast of Looney Tunes in this. So
Yeah. I do find it weird that Daffy is so innocent, but then again, that may just be an affect of trying to recapture early Daffy, who was a little bit less conniving and a little bit less the animated equivalent of George Costanza. That being said, I kind of miss Daffy being kind of the animated equivalent of George Costanza, and not in the way he was trying, like not in the way they tried to force him to be in the Looney Tunes show, not in the I'm a lazy slacker kind of way, but in the I plot and scheme and connive and I'm awesome kind of way.
Ed Brewer says this makes me miss Mel Blanc.
Don't we all, Ed? Don't we all?
Yep.
I like I said earlier, may Mel Blanc and Chuck Jones, rest in peace. May Porky Pigs, that's all folks, sing me to thy rest.
Mhm. Right. Carrot juice.
Carrot juice.
This place isn't kidding around. I am amused.
I claim this in the name of Mars.
Bring the kids.
So yeah, no, it's basically just doing the whole sketch comedy thing, and
Yeah.
you like that. I like that a lot.
The I am amused doesn't seem very Bugsy, because Bugs was always a little bit more, not quite cynical, but very very much a smart aleck. He was always one step ahead of ahead of everybody. He was always the smartest person in the room, and I kind of miss that.
I think it's just what you're seeing here. I mean, again, it could be different in the show.
Yeah, the tone's a little off, but if it's a choice between this and the Looney Tunes show from the 2000s, I will take this every time. Carrot juice.
I will say though, I find it funny that I'm actually curious though. Is this are these Bugs kids? Because rabbits and all, and the whole
And to quote yet another great cartoon, not quite as great as Looney Tunes, though. Plank, I told you that bunnies would take over the world, and they have.
I was going to try and give the Double D saying where he says, I can't remember what the rabbits were called, but practicing their multiplication tables.
Mr. and Mrs. Bunny have been practicing their multiplication tables. I believe was the line that Double D said to Ed and
Yeah.
Ed and Eddie. Speaking of which, Danny Antonucci, are we ever going to figure out what's under Double D's hat? Why is there no sequel movie where we explore the intricacies of what's under Double D's hat? God damn it!
Yeah, I would like a continuation of that series.
But by the same people, because for the love of God, do not reboot Ed and Eddie. You will kill it.
Yeah, not reboot it. Like I said, a continuation. Like
Yeah.
The after all of that, like they're.
Yeah. I don't think I need a continuation necessarily, but a sequel movie that explores finally what's under Double D's hat would be good.
That is bugging you, isn't it?
Okay, Double D was always my kind of self-insert character on that show, because he was always the character I related to the most. So, yeah, and as big as the mystery of what Eddie's brother is and what he looks like is, it pales in comparison to what's under Double D's hat. That is one of the great cartoon mysteries of our generation, and I'm going to stand by the fact that we need a conclusion to that at some point.
My money is still on Scars.
Yeah, like he was in a car wreck or something.
Yeah, and to be pretty young though, because
we see in the flashback episode he's a very little kid and he's still wearing the hat.
Yeah, god damn.
Well, but that would go a long way to explain why he's so nervous and anxious and very very high strung about stuff. Because if you suffered trauma at that early of an age, and it always there in the mirror to remind you, I can imagine clinging harder to order and logic just to make the world make sense.
Yeah. God, that show was good.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Okay. We gotta finish this. No more.
Yeah. We somehow got sidetracked from Looney Tunes to Ed and Eddie, which is an insult to Looney Tunes, because as good as Ed and Eddie is, Looney Tunes is one of the gods of animation. So praise be to that all and folks.
Characters.
Characters.
I just love these new streaming channels. Woohoo! Let's go for a celebration! That's it!
Okay. I was annoyed by the streaming comment, but that stinger got me. Well done.
Yeah. All in all, it doesn't look bad. The thing I didn't really like about the trailer was kind of the music and more like the cover of the original thing. That maybe that's just me.
I would have preferred seeing the music first, the merry-go-round broke down music, before. But that being said, like I said, if everything in that show is as good as that end tag was, and some of those moments were just taken out of context a little bit, I will be so happy to have proper Looney Tunes back. And obviously, everyone should go out and watch them if you have any interest in rewatching Looney Tunes, and rewatch. I would say Looney Tunes Back in Action is better than Space Jam, but both of those movies at least deliver on the Looney Tunes part, not necessarily on the rest of the movie's part. But yeah, basically anything Looney Tunes you can get your hands on, please enjoy, except for the Looney Tunes show from from the 2000s, because it was shit, and it will go down in history as hopefully the worst thing the Looney Tunes ever been involved with.
Okay. So we're almost done, and it's not even 10 yet.
Odd.
Yep. All right. So I'm just waiting for the damn thing to load. It's still loading. But I mean, it's going to be on HBO Max, like a lot of things now, apparently.
Yeah. Well, at least HBO is trying to make content that people will be interested in to convince them to get it, instead of being like, here's the next streaming service, buy it because you want, buy it because you have to, not because you want to.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's there's actually like a cartoon that was being created by the guy who did Regular Show. Can't remember what it was called, unfortunately. It was like it was going to be it was going to be like a successor to Regular Show. And again, if you guys haven't seen Regular Show, it is it's good.
It's a pretty good show. I admit that it took me a while to get into it because it was kind of a slow burn at first, but when it gets a little weird, it's worth watching. I still would say the best cartoon in the last few years that's like a classic cartoon is We Bare Bears. I really like We Bare Bears. I find it to be endearing. And apparently the person who created it intended it to kind of be similar to the Peanuts, which I can definitely kind of see.
Oh. Yeah, but if I remember the story, it's like some 20-something people that are like being first-time parents. It's still like the kind of stoner comedy, but in the style of like a family kind of deal.
Yeah.
Which I thought was an interesting premise. And I remember the trailer, and it looked fucking hilarious. It was like a clown and a Speedo. Not Speedo, the thing, Gorath. Not Gorath, you know that yellow thing that's technically a Speedo? I can't remember what it's called. Either way, it was funny as hell. It seemed really crazy, and just it had that same energy as Regular Show. And the article is up and running. This is something that kind of took the storm over Twitter, I believe, during the week.
Mhm.
And okay, so it's from Bounty in the Comics. Progressive nerd culture outlets and tabletop creators claim depictions of orcs are problematic and racist. This is by Spencer Bacali. If I'm saying that last name wrong, I'm sorry. Baculi. Sorry.
Mm.
This is published April 27th, 2020. So yeah, I heard about this and I saw like some tweets and stuff on Twitter about it. Just overall, it is a very stupid thing.
And we will get into why as we go, but
Yeah.
my God.
Oh boy. Okay. Orcs, the monstrous fictional fantasy race, are once again under attack by nerd, in air quotes, culture outlets and creators who are unable to separate fiction from reality or failing to conform to very specific standards of progressive politics.
Okay, I don't care about the fiction from reality thing because this is something that annoys me. Whenever somebody makes a point or an analogy or tries to use or uses a point from a story to back up a point they're making, and you don't like it, people go, "You can't separate fiction from reality." But when it's an analogy that they like, then all of a sudden analogies and metaphors and symbolism and shit are fair game. So I'm just not even gonna touch the fiction from reality argument because it's bullshit. Obviously stories exist so that we can, use them for stuff. And if you've never used a story or an anecdote to convey a lesson or a point or even just a joke, I kind of feel sorry for you. That being said, moralizing is shit no matter how you do it, and therefore that, I think, is more of the problem. It's less of a can't separate fiction from reality thing and more of a good God, what you must imagine reality to be.
Yep. Also, again, I just find it incredibly stupid because it's a completely. I don't really think there's any type of factual evidence that can help with your conclusion.
Yeah, no, it's complete ideological woo, and it is annoying, but
Yeah.
we'll get into it as we go.
Yeah. Okay. On April 25th, Arms of the Tide podcast host Quinn Welsh Wilson asserted their disgust and shock at the in-game description of role-playing as an orc found in the fifth edition of Dungeons and Dragons, claiming that the language used was blatant racism. Archive link, because I guess she must have, or whoever, deleted it apparently. But yeah, here's the image. Hold on. Okay. CW blatant racism. I'm in genuine awe that this shit came out for this edition of D&D. Holy shit! How long has 5th edition been out?
A few years.
Okay.
I think.
I just
Either that or it like just came out a couple months ago. I can't remember. Don't know off the top of my head.
Right.
Anyone want to actually fact check me on that? Because I don't know. I know 3.5 was the gold standard for the longest time, and for some reason they decided to do another edition, but I don't know the time scale.
Right.
I do know a lot of people hate 5th edition for other reasons, usually getting rid of lore that people liked or oversimplifying for the sake of normies that probably wouldn't be interested in D&D in the first place.
I think in contrast with D&D, I might be a normie. I don't know as much as I probably should.
I'm gonna send you a channel if I remember to called Tulok the Barbarian on YouTube. he's a really great D&D channel, and I think you'll get a lot of mileage out of him, because not only does he explain D&D, he also has this series called Building Character, where he will take a character from like a non-D&D setting and teach you how to make that character in D&D using like classes and races and feats from D&D.
I think I know who you're talking about, but you might have to send me a link just so.
Yeah, I'll definitely send it to you, because if you're at all interested in D&D but you don't know enough about it, that's a good channel to sub to, honestly.
Okay, so alright, so he has the image of like the description of role playing an orc. Alright, and again, like this is for 5th edition. I don't know if you know much about 5th edition, like in terms of descriptions and stuff. So, I mean, if just for an orc, could you like, help out with this? I guess is the thing I'm saying.
Yeah.
Fact check is what I meant.
Yeah.
Okay. Role playing an orc. Most orcs have been indoctrinated into a life of destruction and slaughter. But unlike creatures who, by their very nature, are evil, such as gnolls, it's possible that an orc, if raised outside its culture, could develop a limited capacity for empathy, love, and compassion.
Okay, so from what I hear of 5th edition, orcs can only be played as an evil alignment. I don't know if this is a new thing or not. If it is not a new thing, then no DM I've ever played with has ever enforced the an orc has to be evil rule. And I find it to be a stupid rule. However, that being said, if you don't want to play, or you don't want to take on the an orc has to play an evil alignment role, just ignore that rule. It's a minor rule, and there's nothing saying you can't ignore it. People homebrew more complex shit than that literally every day, probably every hour of every day. So if it bothers you that orcs have to play an evil alignment, just ignore that rule. Incidentally, I find orcs to be pretty hot as they are described in the story, ignoring the possibility of an necessarily evil alignment. In fact, in one campaign, I actually had an orc sex slave, because we were in like an old West setting. It was called the Weird West.
Huh.
So, yeah. But yeah, if you read that description and automatically jumped to black people, it might be because you have some negative opinions about black people that you are projecting onto it. Or you might just have to ignore the is necessarily evil feature, like I said, and admit that most of the qualities described or attributed to orcs being, tough, strong, etc., are not bad qualities. The only two qualities that you could conceivably call bad about orcs in D&D are the possible evil predisposition there, and the fact that they're generally kind of stupid. But again, there's nothing saying you couldn't just ignore that rule or find an in-universe reason to counter it and be done with it.
Yeah, there's more to role playing as an orc.
Okay, go ahead.
No matter how domesticated an orc might seem, its bloodlust flows just beneath the surface. With its instinctive love of battle and its desire to prove its strength, an orc trying to live within the confines of civilization is faced with a difficult task.
Okay, but here's the thing. The same is true of Klingons in Star Trek. Almost word for fucking word. The same is true of Saiyans in Dragon Ball. That does not mean that, provided you choose to ignore the evil designation, that those qualities are bad things. a strong person trying to prove that they are strong, absolutely nothing wrong with. A person with a natural predisposition for fighting, absolutely nothing wrong with, especially if, like Goku or Worf, again using Saiyans and Klingons as an example, you find it more worthwhile to fight for the right thing. There's nothing saying an orc couldn't put the desire to fight or the desire to demonstrate their superior strength or what have you to good use. I mean, I'm not much of a fighter myself, but I do happen to know a few people who are that way inclined. Right, Brainstormer? You want to take that one?
I'll be honest. I left for a moment, so I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay, I was just saying how, provided you have the foresight to ignore the has to play an evil alignment rule, there's nothing inherently wrong with someone who's strong desiring to prove their strength, or someone having a natural predisposition to fighting, kind of like the Klingons from Star Trek, or
No, I was there. I was there for that. It's just for the part about you talking about me is where I wasn't at.
Oh, I was just saying how if an orc decides to put that desire to fight and prove themselves to good use, there's nothing saying they couldn't, like Goku or Worf, find a moral structure that they could actually put their skills to good use in. There are people with natural predispositions to fighting who want nothing more than to punch the shit out of evil. Hence, my referencing you.
True, but I would always try to find diplomacy first before I toss hands.
Yeah. However, point being, if you were the kind of person who had a natural predisposition to fight and a desire to prove physical strength, there are ways that you can put that predisposition to good use that don't involve being essentially a sociopath. Basically, every knight character ever written is sort of like that. In a classical context, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on.
Okay. The role-playing and orc section describes how orcs are indoctrinated into life of destruction and slaughter, but hold the ability to develop a limited capacity for empathy, love, and compassion. It reads in full. Because I think there was only like... Oh, no, it's the same.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Welsh Wilson received a wave of backlash from fantasy fans who argued that not only are orcs first conceptualized by J.R.R. Tolkien in his famous Lord of the Rings series, a fictional race, and are not based on real-world minorities, but that Welsh Wilson's assertion was itself racist for assuming that these descriptors were being used in reference to non-white races.
Even if they were referencing real world races, they're distorted enough that it shouldn't matter regardless. But again, if it bothers you that there's an evil restriction, ignore the evil restriction. If it bothers you there's generally a intelligence modifier issue, then just ignore that. Otherwise, you have a strong, tough, durable, 8 to 10 foot, 500 to 900 pound creature to work with. Just have fun with it.
Isn't that what D&D is about?
Well, yeah. That and extremely intricate math.
Oh shit, I feel like I wouldn't be that good at D&D then.
No, you just basically have to keep track of like character stats and item stats and shit.
Oh,
Like I said, watch Tulok the Barbarian. It'll make a lot more sense then.
I also watch Critical Role from time to time. So
Yeah.
granted, that's mostly for storytelling reasons, but
Yeah.
okay. So I think we have a couple of yeah, we have some of the tweets that they were talking about that I think were kind of being the backlash towards Welsh Wilson.
Okay.
Okay, so we have Helco. Orcs aren't human in some settings, depending on their origins. They may generally not have a complex personhood. Tolkien's Uruk-hai walked and talked, but were still made out of mud and only wanted to destroy. This isn't racism. Then 1,000 Jutsu. Are Tolkien orcs racist? Explicitly based them off the stereotype of the Mongol horde, but not actual Mongolians.
Okay, this is a little bit of an obfuscation here, just because I don't like D&D orcs, or obviously the term orc is pulled from Tolkien, and some of the qualities of orcs are pulled from Tolkien, but whether orcs from Tolkien are racist or not is a different discussion. And what we've actually already done because of that one Lord of the Rings article we did a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, it's as stupid as it sounds.
Yep.
But it's a different kind of stupid, is all I'm saying.
All right. Demiface. The whole orcs resemble black people argument just tells me that people that think murderous, crude monsters represent black people already think black people are like that and are outing their own racist beliefs.
Fair argument, probably, but generally speaking, appealing to people's motives doesn't really solve anything. It actually deepens the problem. So I would avoid it as a general rule.
The DC voices got excited when I saw orcs were trending. As a lifelong, well, from my early teens, fans of orcs with a K, not a C, and general orcoid creatures. Never in my life have I, or anyone I know, associated orcs with people of color. Who the fuck does that? Who the fuck does is what he actually said. I don't know why I said that.
Yeah, that is a good question. Namely, people who have an ideology in their heads and cannot see beyond said ideology ever.
Ryuku Matoi. How the absolute fuck do you look at orcs and see black people? How do you equate man-eating monsters to black people without a single shred of irony or self-awareness, and have the gall to call people who are saying D&D is just a game racist?
The logic, and I use that term loosely, is orcs basically resemble stereotypes about black people taken to their extreme, so that is where people are getting it from. It's still fucking stupid because, as I said, if the evil restriction bothers you, ignore it. If the intelligence restriction bothers you, ignore it, or find some way of lessening it at least. And otherwise, orcs are 500 to 900 pound giants who are between 8 and 10 feet tall. Thereby, I feel no shame in saying that when done right, orcs are hot.
I feel like you try to bang an orc once per campaign.
No, just that one time I had the orcish sex slave.
What was your alignment in that one? I'm just curious.
A lawful neutral. I always play a lawful neutral because that's the one that the. Did I ever show you the D&D personality test?
Yeah, you did.
Okay, I thought I did, but I couldn't remember. But yeah, I always get put in lawful neutral, and I don't dispute it because it makes sense, and I like things that are not moralistic and make sense. Hence, probably why I'm lawful neutral in the first place.
Been a while since I did that. But anyway, after initially asking their critics to please learn how to read text, just basic media analysis stuff, Welsh Wilson would later explain that their statement was about language used by colonizers to justify colonial violence, stating they were attempting to point out parallels in rhetoric and language in describing orcs to language historically used to dehumanize people and justifies colonial violence.
Okay, so here's a question, my darling. Is it bad to be physically strong? If not, then why is that a problem? Is it bad to be tall? If not, why is that a problem? The only two problems that you could conceivably have are the intelligence score deficit and the necessity to an evil alignment. Which, by the way, if it's been a thing longer than 5th edition, no DM of mine has ever enforced. And if I were DMing a campaign, I would not enforce. But if it bothers you, then that is a rule that you are free to ignore. Like everybody fucking else. There is nothing saying you couldn't create a smart, good, or lawfully aligned orc character who nonetheless was a brick shithouse. So why don't you just do that? And then any negative aspects of the stereotype have been erased, but the positive aspects are still intact, and you can play an orc to your heart's content. This is not that hard. You are making it harder than it needs to be. Moving on.
Yep. Okay. So the tweets that were referenced are shown here. There's more to these tweets, so I don't know. Should I read them in their entirety, or should I just move on from them?
I think we can move on if we.
I mean, there's nothing really to it. It was already covered in the actual article itself, so.
Oh, okay. Moving on.
However, they were not alone in their views on the fictional race. Numerous independent tabletop RPG developers and community figures quickly rushed to defend Wilson, flaunting their progressive politics and doubling down on the idea that lore faithful descriptions of orcs actively promoted racism. And then there's a picture of an orc from World of Warcraft, and he's fucking green.
Mm-hmm. So are D&D orcs usually.
Yep. Yeah, so I don't really get the whole color thing.
Because it's based on stereotypes or I shouldn't say it's based, but it resembles stereotypes of black people. But if you ignore the evil and stupid parts of that, like you can for orcs, most of the stereotype is actually pretty badass.
Yep.
So what the fuck is wrong with it?
Okay.
Or you could just play a half orc, which could have the majority of all the positive qualities and fewer of the negatives.
Yep. Yeah, I've actually never played D&D. Thought about it, but didn't have anyone to play with.
Yeah, we definitely need to get you in a campaign at some point.
Yep. Anyway, this included Sinister Beard Games creator Ollie Jeffrey. I don't know why I said Oil. Who connected the language used for orcs with real-world historical justifications for slavery and genocide of indigenous peoples.
Let me guess. Savages, barely even human. Savages, drive them from our shore. They're different from us, which means they can be trusted. We must sound the drums of war.
Yeah, so here's a tweet. It's coded racism. The same language that about certain races being inherently savage and being able to be domesticated that was used to justify slavery and the genocide of many indigenous people.
Again, much of the orc description was positive. So if you dislike it, you can keep the positive aspects and ignore the negative ones. Have a nice day.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Monkey's Paw Games founder Nicholas Mask bizarrely concluded after an extended Twitter rant that the continued employ of dehumanizing/degrading language to describe non-human fantasy species or use of racial tension as a plot point in Dungeons and Dragons and other fictional works somehow justify the racist ideologies of race science and biological determinism. Before you do go, may I try?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. For the record, the so the dehumanizing language to describe non-human fantasy species, that and the whole that also falls in with the racial tension as a plot point. If done well, it can be an interesting story, specifically if that for a D&D campaign, because again, it's a roll of the dice kind of game where it all takes chance and luck and stuff, and you don't know how it's going to end. And I would assume a good number of people who do have that in their campaign, the racial tension thing, obviously is a major plot point. If not for the whole party, then for a specific character or something. Usually.
Mm-hmm.
A specific player, not character. I don't know why I say character.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and usually I assume it's to end the racial tension.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I assume, I don't know how.
Or just to offer flavor to, say, I don't know, an evil or chaotic character. Because, not everyone in D&D is good by definition. Hello. That's why the alignment scale exists.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're playing a directly evil character, you might want to have them do something like, oh, I don't know, be racist, as a demonstration of their evil, you see.
Yep. No, if I played a chaotically evil character, I would be very much like Hexadecimal from Reboot.
Ah.
By which I mean, you really wouldn't know what I'd do. Mostly,
Yeah.
I'd probably do good things, just because I'm chaotic and I don't really care.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, it's fun to be bad sometimes.
Yep. You've gotta love to be hated, find it good to be bad. The crowd is full of gentlemen, but they hate to see, or they pay to see the cad. That's a line from a song sung by Mr. Burns in The Simpsons, if anyone doesn't know.
Sounds something similar to like a Tim Burton villain song in a Tim Burton musical.
Yeah, kind of.
And anyway, so again, we have the. Well, I mean, like, if you have anything to say to that, don't, because I was kind of.
No, you can go ahead.
Right, so moving on. That's kind of a flawed. Yeah, no, that's very much a straw man right there.
Yeah, you're using two different definitions of the term not human. There's not human because they are in some way biologically, physically, or morally inferior, and there's not human because they effectively don't exist as they are being presented in the text. And in this case, it is definitely the second definition we're going with. So, yeah, false. So much false. Moving on.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, there are a couple other ones that weren't covered in the paragraph. Okay, so I'm so fucking tired of having to spell this out for y'all dirty-legged thin lips. Okay, maybe if
My
you're
darling, what you just said was a racial statement about people who are not your race.
uh hmm,
Thin lips, because it's a stereotype mostly based in genetic fact, by the way, that black people tend to have thicker lips, as do a lot of people of varying ethnicities to various degrees.
okay. Well, no, you gotta remember, don't. It's okay to be racist to white people. Apparently,
Yeah, well, except it's still racist, you see, because it's a judgment on a larger scale based on race.
well, no, I know it's fucking stupid. I'm just saying, like,
No, I know. I just, in case anyone does genuinely think that, there's my answer.
fucking jackasses.
Hmm.
And if your entire personality didn't revolve around being smug and contrary, you'd be capable of more than a surface level understanding of literally anything.
My darling, you are the one being contrary here. You are in the vast minority here, and your rationalizations are just that. They are rationalizations. They do not actually contain any substance with which you can justify this irrepressible amount of smug you got going on here. Fuck off, my darling.
Then, if you think it's still okay in 2020 to justify race science, biological determinism, and dehumanize and degrading language to describe non-human fantasy species, or use race to... Oh, okay, it's just...
Okay, race science, my darling, does exist. Races, as far as we classify them, are, at least in some sense, genetically oriented. And biology does determine things. There's a difference between that and biology determines everything, which is biological determinism. But to say that certain racial groups have certain predispositions, natural predispositions to various things because of how those different races evolved from one another, is not deterministic. It is just simply saying that this is a concrete variable that can be measured and qualified. Darling. Black people are on average stronger than white people and Asian people. Asian people are on average smarter than people of other races. Jewish people are, generally speaking, more inclined to the kind of number crunching that would be good in finance, and so on and so on. There are reasons for all of these factors. Many of them happen to be long-standing predispositions garnered from many thousands of years in a particular culture or controlled by a particular set of circumstances. Because if you say prevent a group of people, say Jews, from having jobs outside of the financial sector, surprise, surprise, the ones that survive will become very, very good in the financial sector. If you are, say, selected for your physical strength, say, because you're a slave class, surprise, surprise, you will end up with denser bones and stronger muscles on average, surprising no one. Acting as though these things that are categorically true are not true, or are in some way immoral to bring up, is bullshit, because morality has no bearing on what is, only what should be, and even that is very heavily overused a lot in these situations. Moving on.
Alright, so Riot Games writer and editor Dante Douglas disingenuously concluded that everyone who is saying that this discourse is about anything else is being obtuse or smoke screening.
Or you are being dense and refuse to dislodge your ideological lens, and people are trying to help you surgically remove it by talking basic bitch common sense to you. Moving on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there are the tweets here if you want me to read those, or we can just move from those.
I don't know. If you think there's anything of substance to respond to in them,
Well,
then
I'll be
sure.
honest. I think it's pretty much the same as the others.
Okay, then yeah, we can skip.
Yeah, okay. As the debate around this issue continued to mount on social media, comicbook.com published an article decisively titled "Why Orcs Are Problematic in Dungeons and Dragons." I saw that article actually. Didn't read it, but I saw it.
I think we should have responded to that instead, to be honest.
Maybe next time.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. In which comicbook.com writer Christian Hoffer attempts to infer that orcs are inherently racist despite the fact reported within the article that Tolkien noted in other letters that orcs were not meant to be representative of a particular culture of people, and that orcs could be found on both sides of any conflict along with genuinely good people. And here's the full quotes from the article. Now, Tolkien noted in other letters that orcs were not meant to be representative of a particular culture of people, and that orcs could be found on either side of any conflict along with genuine good people. However, his depiction of orc culture is a monolithic society of evil, human-like creatures became a standard element in epic fantasy. Over time, various artists and authors used elements of various real-world non-European cultures when depicting orcs in books and other media, thus solidifying the idea that orcs are a reflection of non-European races, which is incredibly problematic. Okay, Don, before you do, let me try speaking as a writer.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. For the record, when an author uses various different other cultures that are, different from like a standard one like European, it's often more or less to, I guess, grant insight to that kind of culture. Granted, it wouldn't be the same culture as a real world culture that it's being, based upon.
Yeah.
However, it is simply just a different look at a culture. Like, I actually tried writing an orcs once in a fantasy series I tried to write when I was younger. And I tried to have them be like, well, they lived in the desert, right?
Mhm.
And certain stuff like that. I mean, it wasn't great, and looking back on it, it's really bad. And like,
Mhm.
in a sense that it wasn't properly fleshed out, like a culture should be. But again, that's my own gripes. Anyway, the the yeah, because Tolkien set the groundwork for pretty much everything that would be considered epic fantasy, and everyone has done their, and all the other authors that have come after him have just tried to recreate it, or have tried to just take elements from it and be inspired from them, like me.
Yeah.
And it's not representative. And again, going back to the whole taking elements of real cultures, that doesn't reflect any type of view on those cultures.
Yeah.
In the story.
Not to mention that Tolkien took a lot of his inspirations from mythology directly.
Yeah. And so, I think that's the fundamental flaw in these people's arguments, is that they're, while they take inspiration from cultures of people, I think if you're trying to create some type of argument about orcs, it's more of a reflection of like the darker side of humanity, our more brutal and animalistic nature.
Yeah, the parts of ourselves that don't aspire to anything higher or better.
Yeah. Or basically we're just mindless animals. Well,
Yeah.
okay, maybe not mindless, but
Yeah.
we just focus.
the part of ourselves that gives in to our animalistic nature or our instincts rather than our emotions, passions, reason, or intuition.
Mhm. But again, like in stories of orcs, there are orcs. Like fuck, I wrote. It wasn't orcs. I didn't write orcs. I wrote trolls.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe I got those mixed up. Anyway.
Well, but they're sort of linked because, uh, uh, never mind. I'll get into it in a second. Go ahead.
Yeah, but like I said, there are instances in stories where there are orcs that are good, that go against their natural instincts. And
even if they didn't, there's nothing saying that a natural predisposition to battle and a desire to prove one's prowess with strength means the person in question is bad. There are ways to use both of those impulses constructively and sublimate them rather than allow them to subjugate you. Do you own your emotions or do your emotions own you? That's the question.
Yep. Hoffer's argument, as read, appears to be predicated upon the pretentious assumption that players are unable to separate fiction from reality, despite D&D players having been able to do so since 1974, as he believes many people see games like Dungeons & Dragons as codifying and normalizing the use of racial stereotypes, which leads to both racist situations in the gaming table and encourages racist attitudes getting adopted by some players.
Okay, demonstrate how. Don't just assert, for one. For another, orcs come from I believe it's Anglo-Saxon term orkneas, which is essentially a term for a type of goblin or dark elf. Secondly, the tokens of the or the orcs of the Tolkien mythos are created from corrupting elves by Melkor, who is essentially the devil of the Tolkien mythos. So, if anything, you might want to actually have empathy for them rather than decry their very existence. Also fuck off. Moving on.
Alright, so Alright, so orcs as an analog to real-world racism has become a reliable subject for discussion in recent years due to the rise in popularity and adoption of social justice theory. In 2018, science fiction author Andy Duncan stated that there was a repeated notion in Tolkien that some races are just worse than others, and that in the long term, if you embrace this too much, it has dire consequences for you yourself and for society.
Okay, once again, in Tolkien's mythos, Melkor literally corrupted the creation of these beings. Because in Tolkien's mythos, the world was created by Erwin Ilúvatar, essentially the insert for the monotheistic god, creating a world based on the songs of the Ainur, who were in turn split between the Valar, or sort of the archangels or gods of Middle-earth, or the Maiar, who were sort of the regular angels and or minor gods of the mythos. Now, Melkor, or Morgoth, as he's sometimes called, literally played bad notes on purpose when creating the song that Ilúvatar would eventually use to create the world. He then further corrupted the earth itself when Middle-earth was being constructed, so that anything built from Middle-earth would contain corruptions. And furthermore, would go out of his way to actively corrupt existing creatures because he wanted the ability to bring things to life, and Eorl Ilúvatar wanted to keep that power for himself. And thereby is where we get orcs. Orcs in Tolkien's mythos are essentially corrupted elves, and thereby are elves if they were distorted to the maximum degree they possibly could be. And if we're going based on non-Tolkien related mythos, they are essentially goblins with a little bit of panache. And either way, being conniving and animalistic is kind of their thing. Moving on.
Right. Okay. Where was I? All right. Former Disney Star Wars author Chuck Wendig criticized Lord of the Rings in 2019 for being too white and male and straight, and ironically not fantastic enough. As of writing this, Welsh Wilson's Twitter account has been set to private following the mounting discourse and backlash towards their initial statement. That is the end of the article.
Okay. God, that.
Honestly, I got really nothing to say.
Oh.
I mean, yeah, no, it's just overall the whole thing about orcs and other species that aren't human in like a fantasy kind of style, well, fantasy story or game or whatever, being being called like, well, you know, like I'm trying to think of the word. God damn. Problematic and racist, and is really stupid. Honestly,
Yes.
because when you really look at it, well, again, like most fantasy settings are set in like a medieval period, and most of the time medieval times were kind of sucked a lot.
Yeah. The past was terrible for a lot of people, unfortunately.
Yep. Well, actually, pretty much all people, it all always sucked for everyone.
Yeah. And the past sucks for various different people for various different reasons. Unfortunately, the world is not perfect by human standards. I would say probably mostly because human standards are fucked up, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, but it's actually interesting because I could bring up like the one of the fantasy series, one of the fantasy series I'm working on, and like one of the races that I was working with, which is the succubi and incubi, like the basically lust demons.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really sure. Like if we're talking like how an SJW would view it, I have no idea how you would view that in some type of negative light towards anyone.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to imagine.
I mean, you could do with the animal people I was working on too. Um, yeah, again, I can't really think of anything because I don't really.
Mm. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to stay awake enough to do the last Mary Sue article.
Well, okay. So, out of respect to my friend and not wanting him to fall asleep live, we will move this one to being the first thing next week. Also, I will admit I'm kind of tired too. So, it's
Yeah.
not even 11.
Yeah, well, but apparently neither of us really got sleep last night. So
Yeah. But yeah, we're sorry, folks. This has kind of been a fuster cluck for a while. I will say that as just do a brief thing with comic recommendations. Like I said, I'm still reading Doom Patrol. It's a very big book to read through. Totally recommend that. Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol, first volume, very good so far. Highly recommend.
mm-hmm.
I assume Dome would want to plug the 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 book series you've been reading.
Yes, the Dresden Files, definitely worth checking out. I recently finished off Skin Game in preparation for when Peace Talk comes out. So yeah, it's really good. Also, because I mentioned it this podcast, if anyone hasn't read Tolkien, read Tolkien. I don't know if there are Lord of the Rings comics, but I'm sure there must be Lord of the Rings comics somewhere.
Yeah,
If
no,
not, then somebody needs to get on that like yesterday.
yeah. All right. I guess with that, folks, I want to say goodbye, adios, aloha, auf Wiedersehen, sayonara, peace, cheers, and
Shalom, I'm tired, so fuck off all of you.